It had been days since the moment in the bar with Adrian. Zara couldn't stop thinking about it. The way his voice had dropped, the way his fingers grazed hers. There was something magnetic about him, something that pulled at the edges of her carefully constructed walls. But every time she tried to think past the intense attraction, another issue rose to the surface. The girls. The constant parade of women in and out of Adrian's apartment was too much for her to ignore. Every time she returned home late, she could hear laughter and hushed voices coming from the other side of the wall. Some nights, she'd hear them until the early hours of the morning, and no matter how hard she tried to shut it out, the thoughts plagued her. She'd often find herself pacing the living room, her mind wandering, imagining what it was about Adrian that kept them coming back. What was it about him that drew these women in? Was it his looks, his wealth? Or was there something darker, more magnetic, something she couldn't put her finger on? One night, as she sat alone in the apartment, the sound of Adrian's door opening and the muffled giggles of a woman caught her attention. Zara clenched her fists, fighting the burning sensation in her chest. She hated how it affected her. She hated that it made her feel like she wasn't good enough, like she didn't belong in his world. I'm not some charity case, she thought bitterly. I won't fall into his trap. But the thoughts wouldn't stop. Every time she heard those voices, every time the noise of Adrian's conquest filled the apartment, she couldn't help but wonder what he had. What made him so irresistible? Was it his commanding presence, the sharp edge to his voice, or the way his body moved when he entered a room, all too confident, like he owned everything and everyone? Zara closed her eyes, biting her lip to suppress the thoughts. She had made a promise to herself a long time ago, never again. After what she had gone through with her ex, she'd sworn off men altogether. No more heartbreak, no more lies. 5 years ago, she had given him everything. Her heart, her trust, her love. She had believed in him, in their future. She thought they were building something real, but everything came crashing down when Zara found out the truth. Her ex, a man she had been in love with for years, had been married the entire time they were together. He had kept the secret from her. And when she discovered the truth, when she found the wedding pictures hidden in his drawer, her heart shattered. She confronted him, demanding the truth, and instead of regret, she was met with his cold indifference. He apologized, but it wasn't an apology. It was a betrayal. Zara had wanted to run, to disappear, to never see him again. But what really terrified her was what his wife would do. She had feared for her life. The woman was furious, furious enough to threaten Zara, screaming at her, demanding she stay away from her husband. Zara barely made it out alive, but she did. She had never been the same since. She vowed to never let another man into her heart again. No matter how many times Adrian looked at her like he was going to devour her, no matter how many times his presence set her body on fire, Zara would never let herself fall for it. The day had been unbearable. Zara had spent hours refining her designs, pouring every bit of energy she had into making them perfect, only for Adrian to tear them apart in a single breath. This isn't good enough, Zara. I expected better. Is this really the best you can do? Each criticism had landed like a dagger, sharp and unforgiving. She had held her composure in the office, refusing to let him see how much his words had affected her, but inside she had been fuming. And now, after all that, after spending the entire day trying to impress him, she walked into their shared apartment, only to find this. The dim lighting, the scent of expensive liquor, and the soft hum of music in the background set an intimate mood. There were only a handful of people, but the energy in the room was unmistakable. Laughter, hushed conversations, and the occasional flirtatious giggle filled the space. Zara's jaw clenched as she took in the sight before her. Women draped over Adrian, leaning too close, whispering into his ear. His friends were lounging on the sofas, drinks in hand, amused by whatever was happening. It was like she had walked into a private club, except this was her home, and there he was. Adrian Knight, looking effortlessly smug, a whiskey glass in one hand while a girl, some blonde in a red dress, was perched on his lap, running her fingers through his hair. His shirt was slightly unbuttoned, revealing just enough to tease, his usual arrogance on full display. Something snapped inside Zara. She stormed forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor, her anger bubbling over. "Are you kidding me right now?" Adrian barely glanced at her. "Zara," he murmured, swirling the whiskey in his glass, as if she were just another guest at his party. Her fists clenched at the way he said her name. Lazy, indifferent, like she was nothing to him. "You have got to be joking," she hissed, ignoring the curious stares of the others in the room. "I spent the entire day at work, fixing my designs because you tore them apart, only to come home to this." Adrian exhaled, a slow, exasperated sound. "I didn't ask you to fix them, Zara." Her eyes burned with fury. "Excuse me?" "You should have gotten it right the first time," he said, finally meeting her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Maybe then you wouldn't have wasted the whole day." Zara's stomach twisted. She had never hated anyone as much as she hated him in that moment. "You're unbelievable," she spat. But Adrian wasn't listening anymore. The blonde in his lap leaned in, pressing her lips to his neck, whispering something that made him smirk. Zara's body went rigid. "Are you even listening to me?" she demanded, her voice rising. But Adrian just took another slow sip of his drink, not even sparing her a glance. Then, as if she wasn't even standing there, he turned to the blonde, gripping her chin between his fingers, tilting her face up to his, and kissed her, right in front of Zara. Heat flooded Zara's chest, rage, humiliation, something she didn't want to name. The way his lips moved against the blonde's, the way his fingers pressed against her skin, it made her stomach churn. He was doing this on purpose. Adrian wasn't just ignoring her, he was making a statement. Zara had never felt so invisible in her own home. Her nails dug into her palms, her breathing uneven. She should have walked away, she should have turned and left. But she couldn't. Because beneath all the anger, beneath the jealousy she didn't want to acknowledge, there was something else. Something dangerous. Something that made her want him more than she wanted to admit. Zara barely remembered falling asleep. After the party, after the humiliation of watching Adrian kiss another woman in their own apartment, she had stormed into her room, slamming the door shut behind her. But even in the silence of her bedroom, she could still hear the distant murmur of voices, the occasional laughter, and the clinking of glasses. She had wanted to scream. Instead, exhaustion had won. Her body had given up, sinking into the mattress, and before she knew it, darkness took over. The next morning. The first thing Zara registered when she woke up was the light, bright, too bright. Her eyes fluttered open, squinting at the golden sunlight streaming through her curtains. Something felt off. There was no soft buzz of her alarm, no hurried footsteps from Adrian getting ready for the day. Her heart lurched. Then she saw the time. Shit! Zara bolted upright, panic setting in as she grabbed her phone. 10:24 a.m. She was supposed to be at work 2 hours ago. She practically threw herself out of bed, her legs still tangled in the sheets, nearly stumbling as she rushed toward the bathroom. Everything was a mess. Her hair, her makeup from the previous day still smudged slightly under her eyes, her brain still groggy from the deep sleep she had fallen into. How had she slept this long? Then it hit her. Adrian, the party, the fight, the way he had ignored her, dismissed her, kissed someone else right in front of her. She had been so exhausted, emotionally drained, furious, that her body had completely shut down. And now she was late. She barely had time to shower, opting for a quick rinse before throwing on a blouse and pencil skirt. There was no time for breakfast, no time for coffee. She grabbed her bag, slipping her heels on as she dashed out of the apartment, her pulse hammering wildly. She barely noticed the empty living room. The apartment was spotless, like no party had ever happened at all. Adrian was gone. Of course he was. He never missed work. No matter how reckless he was, how careless he seemed, Adrian never let anything interfere with his business. He was like two different people. The arrogant, untouchable playboy who made her life miserable at home, and the ruthless, unstoppable CEO who commanded absolute respect in the corporate world. The thought made her stomach tighten. Zara had already disappointed him once with her designs. And now, she was late. She was so screwed. By the time Zara arrived at the office, she was out of breath. She had barely managed to rush through the front doors before the receptionist gave her a knowing look, one of pity. They know, Zara thought bitterly as she rode the elevator up to her floor. They all know I'm late. Her mind raced with excuses. I was sick. I had an emergency. My alarm didn't go off, but none of them would work. Not in a place like this. Not with Adrian. The moment she stepped out of the elevator, she could feel the shift in energy. The floor was unusually quiet. And then, "Zara Benson, report to the CEO's office immediately." The announcement rang through the entire workspace, and Zara felt the weight of every pair of eyes turning toward her. Her breath caught. Adrian had summoned her. Of course he had. Zara straightened her shoulders, her pulse racing as she made her way down the hall. She could already imagine the coldness in his eyes, the unimpressed smirk tugging at his lips as he reminded her, yet again, that she wasn't good enough. Zara's heels clicked against the marble floors as she made her way to Adrian's office. Her heart was pounding, her hands clammy despite her best attempt to stay composed. She knew she was in trouble. Adrian never tolerated carelessness, especially in his business, and she had been so careless. Taking a deep breath, she reached for the door handle and stepped inside. Adrian was standing behind his massive glass desk, his broad shoulders tense, his fingers drumming against the surface. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, his tie loosened just slightly, giving him that effortlessly powerful look. But it was his expression that made Zara's stomach drop. Dark, controlled, lethal. He wasn't just angry, he was furious. She barely had time to open her mouth before his voice cut through the air, sharp and biting. "You're late." Zara swallowed hard. Save it." His voice was low, controlled, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. He wasn't in the mood for excuses. "Do you have any idea how unprofessional this looks?" She bit her lip. "It was an accident. I overslept." "Overslept?" Adrian let out a sharp, humorless laugh, running a hand through his hair. "Zara, this isn't some casual internship. This is Knight Enterprises. I don't hire people who can't show up on time." Zara clenched her fists, heat rising to her face. She hated being talked down to like this, especially by him. "I worked late last night," she snapped, stepping forward. "I was exhausted. I barely slept. And whose fault is that?" He cut in smoothly, his eyes locking onto hers. "You couldn't handle it, so you collapsed. And now, you think I should go easy on you?" His words hit deep, and Zara hated that they did. He took a step closer, towering over her, his presence suffocating. Zara could smell his cologne, rich, masculine, utterly intoxicating. And then he smirked. "Tell me, sweetheart," he murmured, tilting his head slightly. "Is that how you are with everything? You start strong, but the moment things get too hard, you just give up?" Zara's breath hitched. He had no idea what she was thinking in that moment. No idea that her mind was spiraling, not with frustration, but with desire. She could barely focus on his words anymore. Not when he was standing this close, not when his voice had dipped into something dangerous, something that sent heat curling in her stomach. She hated him. She did. But God, she wanted him. She was horny, and it was all his fault. Adrian's eyes flickered downward just for a second, as if he knew the effect he was having on her, as if he could see the way her breath had quickened, the way her lips had parted slightly. Then, As if to torture her further, he leaned in just a little more, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "You like being scolded, don't you?" Zara froze. Her pulse pounded wildly, her body betraying her as a flush of heat spread across her skin. She wanted to slap him. She wanted to kiss him. But instead, she turned away, desperate to escape his presence before she did something stupid. "I'll fix it," she muttered, her voice unsteady. Adrian chuckled lowly behind her. "See that you do. And Zara?" She hesitated at the door, gripping the handle tightly. "Next time," he said smoothly, his voice dripping with amusement, "I won't be so forgiving." Zara couldn't focus. No matter how hard she tried, no matter how much work was piled on her desk, her mind kept returning to him. The way he had looked at her. The way his voice had dropped when he spoke. The way her entire body had reacted to him like a live wire, aching for something she shouldn't want. She crossed her legs under her desk, shifting slightly, but it did nothing to ease the tension in her core. Her body was betraying her, and she hated it. Adrian was the worst kind of temptation, the kind that got under her skin, the kind that made her want to lose herself completely. And the worst part? She knew he knew. Because every time she looked up, every time she thought she had escaped his gaze, he was already watching her. A smirk tugging at his lips, like he was waiting for her to break. To be continued. If you find this story intriguing, please do well to support us by liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. Thank you for watching to the very end.